Welcome back, everyone, to another Sporting Blog podcast. As ever, there's been a bit of a break since the last one. Day job gets in the way. One day this won't be just a hobby. One day we'll be able to put more effort into it. But as ever, all of our stories are quite well received, and all of our guests have something to say, which is the most important thing. And today, I think I've got guests with definitely something to say. For those that are familiar with British horse racing, there's a long running debate about how good prize money is compared to other areas, and someone who might be able to shed a bit of light on that, amongst many other differences between racing here and abroad, is former jockey Jacob Pritchard-Webb. First off, Jacob, hi, welcome.
Cheers, Ollie. Yeah, thanks for having me.
No, you're welcome. Whereabouts are you calling from today? First, let's get a geographical position.
I'm in Leicestershire. We're about near Hinckley or Shilton. But I've been split my time between here and Hay-on-Wye area in Wales. My grandparents have a hill sheep farm, so I try to spend as much time as I can up there and make sure he's looking after the horses and doing everything right. So yeah.
There you go, out in the valleys. So from one valley, we're not too far from the Valley of the Race Horse here we're in Marlborough, not too far from Lambourne. Do you want to just give an intro to your career? So we say ex-jockey, and there's a reason behind that, but do you want to give a little intro into your career to date and how you got into racing and where you end up now?
Yeah, so my grandparents actually used to do a thing called harness racing. It's very similar to what the trotting is in France and in America. We used to do that in West Wales, and I did that from the age of 14 to 18. And I was never very tall, never very big, and they said, "Well, why don't you become a jockey?" So at 18, I then went to the British Racing School and landed a job at Sir Mark Prescott's institution in Newmarket. And that was a bit of a shock to the system, but a great learning curve and a great school for me. He can be a bit of a taskmaster, very military and run facility. I mean, they still had muck sacks instead of wheelbarrows, which is basically a tarpaulin sack on your back. Um,
That's
and,
brilliant.
but it was great. It was a great place. Got to look at great horses such as Marsha, who multiple Group One winner and ended up being sold for 6 million guineas. Got to ride her and do bits of work. So it was a very good time. But then realizing quite quickly that I wasn't going to be a flat jockey, I then moved to the Cotswolds and ended up at Fergal O'Brien's, tried to be an amateur and pointing and very naive, wet behind the ears still, and things weren't happening quick enough. I was then making mistakes in point-to-point rides, and the stats weren't really good enough, winners to rides and not being noticed enough. And it's just very hard in a yard like Fergal's when he's trying to when he's up and coming. He's got every winner counts at that stage in his career, and he couldn't really support anyone when I was there until somebody like Conor Brace came in, and he was more of a name and had a bit of his backing. So things weren't working out, and after a summer holiday in France, I loved it, and a year later I then decided to make the move there full time and became a professional jockey in France and rode there for 11 months before an immediate retirement happened at Auteuil one day when I ended up having a fall and breaking my back.
Yeah, and it's obviously a massive topic on its own. That kind of huge change, reversal in life, and now you're using a wheelchair to get around, and obviously that's the end of a riding career. But we'll come back to the accident, I think, just in terms of resilience. But after you stopped riding without choice, how long did it take you to decide you wanted to stay in racing one way or another? I mean, did you have the bug? Had the sport grabbed you by that point, or did you kind of think about doing something else?
No, it definitely grabbed me by that point. I was lying in hospital, and it was a case of what was I going to do? And there was never any malice towards the horse. He didn't fall on purpose, and I suppose I was quite lucky. Nobody caused the accident. Nobody caused me to fall. It was just purely bad luck. with how I landed and then the resulting injuries that were caused. So there was no malice to the horse or horse racing. We all kind of know the dangers. You don't get followed around by an ambulance for for no reason. And I was always kind of, I mean, before the accident, the plan was always to ride race horses and take over the farm. And I've just had to come up with like an interim career basically until I can try and take over and adapt the farm. So it was a case of trying to stay involved in horse racing, and I was always fascinated in the pedigrees and stuff. So it kind of fell into the and then a quick Racing Post article where I said I was going to be the next Anthony Bromley, buying Gold Cup winners, that led and fell me into becoming a bloodstock agent.
Yeah, and just for those listening who aren't familiar with racing, I suppose we should just set the stall out. If you're listening and you really don't know anything about racing, and especially in the UK, there are two distinct types of what we call racing under rules. One is flat racing, where the horse doesn't jump over anything, and the other one is national hunt racing, where the horses do jump over various different types of fences and hurdles. So you're concentrating or move towards bloodstock for national hunt racing, I guess, in the main. Why don't you just explain what a bloodstock agent does in the most basic of terms, and what a career can look like that? Sorry, what a career in bloodstock might look like.
Yeah, so a bloodstock agent would basically be somebody who works with a trainer or an owner of the horse to go out and source a specific horse based on the owner or trainer's requirements and budget. So let's say we're sticking down the national hunt jumping route, and I'm working with a trainer. They would say something like, we want a 4-year-old who handles soft ground and is this much money. I then look at France. So having raced out there, I use France as my area and my niche place to source horses. I would then look at upcoming races or sales, and if I feel like there's a horse that's a bit eye-catching and the ground is soft, then I make inquiries into those trainers, and a discussion is had on if it's for sale and for how much. And then if it ticks the yes and yes boxes of those requirements, then photos are taken and negotiations are made on a price, and then a vetting is organized by myself, and hopefully it can be purchased.
So do you you're really involved from the very beginning of the obviously the finding of the horse in question all the way through to the end of the deal. Once the deal's done per se, how much do you follow the horses that you've bought or been involved with? Do they become all a bit like, do they feel all a bit like your own because you want to like prove that they are a successful buy? Is there a lot of after that you get involved with?
I do, but I'm obviously very in the beginning stage of my career. So I've currently bought 9 race horses to race, and 8 of them have won. We actually had a winner 2 days ago at Kempton for Gary Moore.
Oh,
And
nice.
yeah, I'm still part of the WhatsApp group that was formed, during the process of buying him. He was actually bought from a sale. So I'm heavily, not all of them, because you don't have sometimes you buy them and sell them in a sale. So I've bought them myself and sold them on to other people for a sale. So I don't have much to do with the person who's then purchased them. But the clients that I have that I would be quite pally with now and have a good friendship with, yeah, some of them I even help plan races for them, and talk to them as that. So I've bought this horse kind of knowing his background and maybe knowing what he wants as well to a certain degree going forward. So I help talk to the owner and the trainers about, why don't we try. And because I'm not involved in the day to day, I suppose I can bring a different point of view and maybe think a little bit outside the box and say, well, why don't we have a look at this option? Or so it's good because of my situation of being in a wheelchair, has taken away my ability to be involved with the horse as in a close-up manner and day-to-day handling, this has given me another attribute to be involved in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it gives you a different perspective, because I guess you've got to dig in more to the data or the form or watching the videos online and all the other stuff. And there's just a myriad of that sort of amount of information available. Just at the top of the show there, I mentioned the prize money thing, and you've mentioned a couple of times, obviously moving to France, and now your involvement in sourcing horses from France. Again, for those who aren't as familiar with racing, both flat or jumps, could you sort of summarize maybe the key differences between racing here and in France, whether it's to do with prize money or number of fixtures or anything like that? What would you say are the kind of key differences between the setups in both countries?
I think the biggest difference between England and France is we have like 2 seasons in England. National hunt racing is a winter dominated sport, comprising of the best horses and the best races being from October through to April. And then the flat then begins in March, April time, and that then goes until September, October time. And we kind of have that's like the revolving door. Whereas in France, the season is 12 months of the year, with race courses opening and closing. So for example, currently there is jump racing happening in Po, and only in Po across the whole country. That then racetrack closes middle of February, and then at the end of February all the other racetracks start to open up all across the country. So whilst currently all the trainers have a team of horses based at Po and a set of staff, and all the jockeys emigrate down there, as soon as that closes, they'll go back to their homes where the places from where they're from. And then racing opens up all across the country, very much like how it is in England. But there wouldn't be racing every day of the week. It'd be more similar to an Irish system, where there could be 2 or 3 race meetings in Monday to Friday, and then there'd be racing Saturday and Sunday, where Sunday would be the main day of racing in France, where you could have up to 10 race courses, which I like, because it gives more lads opportunities and lads and lasses opportunities to ride in races, because it's spread out, and the country's so big, it gives everyone a fair chance of picking where they want to run their horses as well. So that's a big difference.
Yeah, again, for the uninitiated, one of the most commonly discussed points, apart from the prize money and offer in British racing, is there too much of it? And that's because, unlike Jacob's example of 2 or 3 races meetings a week in France, there's 2 or 3 race meetings a day here in the UK, and you might find that you've got some all-weather racing in the winter in the evenings, which is flat, with the jumps meeting somewhere else in the day, and another one, and it becomes a game of numbers rather than a game of quality, one might say, or one might argue. And therefore the riding opportunities are scattered about, and it's a tough gig for jockeys and the stable staff and everyone, and it's not as easy to plan. But this is a result of how the game is funded with regards to betting, and the betting companies want as many races as possible. What about the prize money then, Jacob? Because it's the longest debate really about prize money here in the UK, both flat and jumps, but I think jumps in particular, the prize money here can be pretty abysmal. How do they differ in France? I mean, obviously it's better, but why is that, do you think?
Well, it's a different system in order to bet. Where in England we have, you can bet through Coral or Ladbrokes or Bet365. In France, you can only bet through the Paris Mutuel, which was basically like the old tote that they ended up selling in the UK, I think back in the 70s or something. But in France, it's the same. So all the betting revenue just goes through one company, and that company is basically as I believe is is owned and run by France Gallo, who was basically the British Horse Racing Authority equivalent. So they see all the money that flows in, and they say all the money that goes out and are dictating what of that betting revenue goes in is then spent on prize money. And what is also quite different, I suppose, is that only 5 race courses are actually owned in France by France Gallo. So they're all funded through the betting system. And then pots are given out to the individual race courses who are owned by, for example, let's say the community or the town. And anything that's on the telly, and they also only have one racing channel over there, which is Acadia, whereas we would have 2. If anything that's on the telly, you can bet online or go to what they call a PMU shop, just like a cafe / bar, and you can watch the racing, and basically a betting shop with a bar. Anything that's shown on the telly live, you can bet from anywhere in France. That's called premium racing. They then have what's called provincial racing, which is mostly done on the Sundays. And out of the 11 race tracks having racing, say 8 could be provincial racing, and it would be a lower class of racing, and some would only have 2 days racing a year, for example. You can only bet on those races if you're specifically at the race course. Therefore, that betting money goes back into the race course, and therefore they can then reinvest that specific betting money back into prize money with the help of France Gallo's PMU system topping them up and aiding them. Because the prize money is not going to be much bigger anyway, because it's provincial racing. And I just like that. So it's all under one house, it's all under one roof, and it's all up to those people who run that to organize it. So we all know where it's going, and we all know who to speak to.
So a sort of point of trivia based on all of that, the UK is the only country in the world that has what we call them licensed bookmakers, which are individual companies that can open bricks and mortar or online places to bet, and they are licensed by a regulator, and then they're allowed to operate as individual companies within the betting market, and that doesn't really exist anywhere else in the world. So in Australia, France, Hong Kong, and other places that allow betting on racing, they are all generally done by this sort of tote or pari-mutuel system, whereby everyone bets and it creates a market based on the amount of interest that's invested into that market, and the price is set by the as a typical market is, if 100 people are betting on the favorite and only 10 people are betting on the others, then clearly the odds move themselves towards shortening the favorite and so on. But the money that's bet into that pot is kind of dictates the pricing. And as Jacob mentioned, when it's all under one roof and it's all going through one place, then the rights, the media rights, as it were, that the race courses give to the betting companies here, that problem doesn't exist anywhere else. So it's a lot easier to control what everyone gets. Also, the UK is in a unique position that we've got generally two large commercial entities that own the majority of the race courses, and then there are independents added in, and then they're paid their media rights based on 2 media companies, or let's call them media companies, that are part owned by some of those racecourse groups. So it's a very different system here, and it's one that is not really working too well for the end participants. It's also quite telling that the France Gallo group are allowed to make all of these decisions and run racing and the betting as they see fit, and it's to everyone's benefit. That obviously won't be the case here because of how complicated everything is. But how do you think it? I mean, you mentioned actually the betting shots with the bars, which is very similar in Australia, right? Where you've got basically in the pubs, there's a little betting window, and you can watch the stuff and you can have a bet, and it's all part of the thing. Do you think it's a better experience for the punter in France than it is here? Like, either a day at the races or just casually watching. Do you think it's a better thing?
if you go to the midweek racing in Paris, there is nobody there. The racetracks don't advertise like the smaller independents or jockey club or arena racing company advertise all their race day and make a big race card, with all the advertising, because that's where they make their money. They sell advertising in the race. France, you turn up, it's €5 entry. In fact, in Po, at the 24 race meetings they have in Po, it's free entry for all 24. And you turn up and there's a piece of paper with all 8 race cards on, and that's also free. So their emphasis isn't bringing in public, because they know the punters will just turn up anyway, the hardcore punters. They're more focused on a racegoer's experiences on the big days, which I think rivals the big days at Cheltenham and Royal Ascot. Yes, certainly. But they definitely don't put an emphasis on a day's racing during the week, as they would do over here. And then you go to the provincial ones, where, because it's more of a community based, the crowds there are incredible, and it's a real community. It's like, again, it's €5 to get in. The wine's great, and it's like €6 for a bottle, and it's a proper local one. And they make a real effort, and whereas they then make a real effort of the racegoers experience, but it's very rare. It would only be once or twice a year for them. So it's a very different market, and it's because of their betting system and such, they almost don't have to make an emphasis on making money by getting people through the door.
Yeah, so it's not as big a commercial thing, really. I've been to Po.
Group 1 races now, not until they get the big days.
Yeah, and that's right, because I've been to the Arc race day, and that's something to behold. It really is. And you're absolutely right, it does rival the good race days here. But finally, there's something about those provincial race days that is really cool. Like, Po's a great example. Basque region of France, very independent, has all sorts of quirky traditions, and the racetrack is sort of one of those, isn't it? And you can feel how it's a real part of the community there. And there's the market just down the road next door. Like, the whole thing's like, it's very cool, and a million miles from like Wolverhampton on a Thursday night. But that's another thing. So in terms of your own career, in terms of your interest in bloodstock, obviously you don't live in France. You live here at the moment. Do you think you'll eventually move towards the UK market once you've had a bit more experience, or do you think you might actually do the opposite and spend more time in France?
No, I think from a living point of view, I'll always stay over here, because, like I said, I've got that farm over in Wales that I'll be taking over one day. But I don't think I'll ever own a racehorse in England as an owner to run. I think what I would do is potentially buy youngsters, say foals, 1-year-olds or 2-year-olds, yearlings or 2-year-olds, and sell them in England as 3-year-olds, maybe with a French, essence, shall we say, like purchased in France, or breed from the farm and sell as 3-year-olds. But actually, I've just bred something now, and I'm going to race that in France, because of the market of, well, one, the prize money, and the training fees are also cheaper, especially with the conversion rate. The training fees are cheaper. You also get a €3,000 a year travel allowance that France Gallo give you to travel the horses to the race courses. So the stakeholders are looked after better, basically. And then also you've got that added market of people in Ireland and England look to France to buy horses out of. So you've got that second-hand market to sell to. Very similar to in flat racing, England now are a nursery to sell to Australia or Hong Kong or America. So it's a similar way of looking at things. Obviously, I'm also lucky having the connections and the trainers to work with, and I don't have the language barrier as such. And the one thing I've also started to do with a client is instead of bringing horses from France to run in England, we're now looking at buying older horses, 6-7-year-olds in England, and sending them to France as almost like a revival of their career. And we've done that with 2 horses this year. We bought them for a total of 22,000 for the pair of them together, and they've ran 10 times. They've both picked up a win each, and in total, the owners collected 87,000 in prize money. And they're not for world beaters, you know. They're not for world beaters or anything, you know. In fact, they would be probably in the handicapping system that we have in the UK, £50 off, say, Constitution Hill and Galopin des Champs. So you know they definitely wouldn't be, you wouldn't be running at Cheltenham, for example, at the festival. But they've managed.
It's a pretty bad, you know, it's a pretty bad indictment on British racing that an ex-jockey in the British racing school that's been schooled here, you know, the first thing you said is, I wouldn't own a horse to race in the UK. I mean, that's not great, is it?
No, but I just did an interview with Felix de Giles, who's champion jockey in France after being there for 10 years. And the one thing he said, and I alliterated just then, is the stakeholders at the lower end are not looked after. And then that also isn't falling into grassroots level. How much longer has point to pointing got, for example? So, and I don't have enough disposable income to play at the top table, so I would be one of the lowercase stakeholders trying to find a needle in a haystack to end up running in the big game, or I'd end up having to wait 15 years before I landed on a lucky penny kind of thing. Whereas in France, these horses can pay for themselves, and hopefully a little bit more. They as in they pay for their training fees and their food and their all that stuff. I obviously worked with race horses for such a long time, and I'm very lucky I have some back at the farm. So I don't need that. I want to go and see them in the stables kind of buzz of it. So I don't mind getting a WhatsApp photo or and watching them race online. I think if you can happily have that, then there's no need. Then you may as well look abroad. That's what I personally think.
Yeah, and you know, you're not the first person I've spoken to over the last 4 or 5 years to have that that attitude and opinion as well. And we know there's a lot of owners at respectfully we say the lower end of the market that are choosing not to own horses and keep them in training here, because it's pretty expensive to keep a racehorse in training for a year. You know, again, for those listening, if you don't know much about racing, at least generally, I mean, this can vary, but you know, forget buying the horse, but just, you know, keeping it alive in training, you know, somewhere between 40-ish, about like 30,000 a year, let's say, and somewhere between those, depending on where you go. And you know, I'm sure in France it's a bit cheaper, but it's not it's not a cheap exercise. And you know, 99 out of 100 horses would never be able to win that sort of money back. And so it's interesting to hear that France not only cheaper, but there's more chance of actually getting it to run in something, you know, good and interesting. And yeah, it's just a shame really, because you know, there's whatever you say, and I don't mean you or me, but people around the world, wherever you go, still reference UK racing as you know, the home of racing. And originally it was all about quality, and that's, you know, the prestige. But it feels like year on year that starts to just filter away a little bit. I don't know if you found that.
Yeah, well, I just think the one thing you said was when you talked about the 2 media companies and all the different race course ownerships, we've almost overcomplicated our system, and therefore we're causing problems for ourselves, which unfortunately get in the way and dominate the conversations to talk about the prestige of
Completely.
English race.
Completely. It used to be that the Jockey Club ran racing in the country, way back in the late 1700s. Jockey Club was established, let's run racing. Then eventually people get jealous of that, so there's another commercial entity. Then the race courses have to be owned, and then there's people that want to build race courses, and how can you monetize the race course? And I think everything has just got, as you say, way overcomplicated, way out of control. And you've got a board that sets the rules. Then you've got two really large commercial groups that basically pay everyone. Some independents that, big ones like Ascot and York that try and keep up and have their own agendas and whatnot. And it's all really this sort of soap opera, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And my view on it but my personal experiences, English racing didn't work for me. I couldn't get a foothold in the door. I wasn't a big enough name. I didn't have any financial supporters buying me racehorses to go and ride in races and stuff. And it didn't work out for me. Whereas France did. So obviously I'm going to have a more positive outlook on that. And then also I actually found that in riding in the races then was also more enjoyable for me. I found it a greater, personally, I think it's a greater test of horse and jockey, because the obstacles you jump in the races over fences, it's a different obstacle, a different type of fence during the race. And so these things start to build up your preference for one over the other. And then I just prefer the whole, the way the races are run, the way the horses are trained. I've just got much more of a positive experience from that one country after leaving the UK where it wasn't working. So then you add in all the stuff we've just been talking about. Well, it's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah. What moving on from that a little bit, what's life like for you now, like compared to your racing days? Obviously, you've got the extremely unfortunate repercussions of the accident, but what about, I mean, that's physically, but of course there's the mental side of things. Staying in racing, do you ever get that kind of wish you could ride again feel, or do you get that competitive bit come back at you, or are you enjoying the bloodstock game because it's an unexpected sort of thing that's come into your life? How would you frame it all at the moment? Because it wasn't that long ago that you had the accident, really.
No, June 2020 it happened, so just over 3.5 years. Yes, there have been some moments definitely over that period of time. Watching, funny enough, Luke Morris winning the Arc on Alpinista, I was there for my old boss. I actually rode the dam for Sir Mark as a stable lad. So I had that connection, and I backed it, and I won quite a bit of money. But seeing him get that exhilarating feeling from winning a race of that magnitude, and knowing that I was never able to try and work my way up, given a fair shot to get to that level, was quite hard and nearly brought me to tears on the day. And then there have been a few other moments where I've watched friends or other jockeys win on horses that I had previously won on, and this was in the first year. It's like, oh, that should have been me, or that could have been me. That's been tough. Less of that now, because some of those horses have retired, thank God, and I haven't got to see anyone. But I still struggle sometimes with like identity.
Yeah.
People now see me as Jacob, a bloodstock agent, not Jacob, a great ex-jockey. Because my career wasn't very long and wasn't loads of winners. But on the contrast to that, it's opened up so many new doors. I've probably got more going for me now, actually, career-wise, bizarrely. And even though going to France, you could say, caused the accident, it's also caused it's been a help in that respect. And then very lucky to have the close-knit friends and family, and the network is what it's about, is what's kept me positive and having such a good support crew.
Yeah, I think people can underestimate the long-term resilience factor, like, because I think there's a lot of preconception that when you have like a life-changing thing happen to you, that it's all about the short term, all about the initial shock and the sudden change in circumstance. But actually, in my experience from my own near death run-in, it wasn't really, the short term was more about recovery, and then it's actually as things go on that things get a little bit trickier, because you start to fall back into the kind of mindset of what things used to be like. Whereas when you're kind of immediately recovering, you're so focused on that. You know what I mean? You're more intensely in the kind of aftermath of whatever happened to you. But later on, it can get a bit, I found it a bit harder sort of later, funnily enough.
It's funny enough, I was saying to a couple of people that I found the last 6 months and into this year more challenging than the year before and the year before and the year before that. Because like you said, the first 18 months after your injury is all about being a permanent patient. That's how I treated it. Then the
Yeah.
year after, you're then throwing yourself into everything. And then last year, it was like everything had kind of started to settle. You kind of found your feet, and you kind of had this, had my Sky Sports job. I had my bloodstock, had the opportunity to do a bit of writing. And then you're like, oh, what's next? Or who am I really? Is this for me? Or and it was a bit frightening, and there was maybe not so much structure, and you're then also still finding, is this what you really want? Is this what you really like? And then also on top of that, all the physical bits just get a little bit tedious then. All the stretching, all the spasms you have due to a spinal cord injury, and dealing with the heat, dealing with the cold. It's like, oh, this isn't getting easier at all. This is, if
Yeah.
anything, it's getting more of a tiresome weight on your shoulders, and your body does, and keeping on top of it is tedious. And if you don't keep on top of it, you just kind of waste in places, and the aches and the pain, and pain makes you grumpy. So yeah, it's been and you're still learning about your body. Some people says it takes 10 years for everything to settle down after a spinal cord injury. So
Mm.
things are still slowly changing, and I'm still learning. So it's been a big learning curve for me.
Yeah, well, I actually found exactly the same thing. In the first 12 months after my uh, brain bleed, I felt like the permanent patient. That's absolutely right, because there's a lot of things you're not allowed to do or can't do. Like in my case, it was driving and all those sorts of normal things. And then the year after, I guess, sorry, it's only been 18 months, but the bit directly after that, as you say, you throw yourself back in because you feel like you're back, back to somewhere. And that kind of gets you going. So you've got the old life, then you've got the new normal, but it's not actually the new normal. The new normal is just the immediate bit where you're like, oh, right, okay, I'm ready to go and do some stuff again. And then once that sort of wears off, and in my case, I've been back at work a year and a bit now. The I'm the same as you. Towards the end of last year, you're like, oh fuck, so this is the real new normal now. Because also it's in the rear view mirror a bit. Do you know what I mean? The accident or the incident's behind you quite a way. And when you talk to people, it's not like, oh yeah, it was 6 months ago. It's now further away, but the effects are still here. But it's a hard one to gauge, and I'm the same. So I was reading about the kind of longer term, and some people are like, oh, it takes 10, or it takes 15, or it takes 5, or whatever. And then you start to think, shit, Christ, I'm still doing all these exercises, still got the pain, and it's it's a hard place to be at times. But funnily enough, I would also say with you, there's been some bizarre silver linings, um, some crazy things that have happened that would never have happened if it wasn't for an incident.
No, it's the wheelchair has opened so many doors, and the story I've been able to tell, and yeah, there's been some look back in the last 3 years, and like been some mad times. I've been invited to some really cool things, and met like some absolute really, really cool people. and also I suppose, you know, the other thing with me is it could have been a lot worse. And I'm still here. So
Yeah.
there's always that. You've always got to have that in perspective, but it doesn't help, like you said, that that there are a lot of obstacles that I've always got to overcome daily, and also the world is not made for wheelchairs as well, which is a constant battle.
Yeah, and actually, that's one of my big bugbears in life. When my wife had a hip operation not that long ago, a couple of years ago, and was off her feet for some time, we really understood that the world is not designed for people that can't walk through doors and up steps. And there are so many places that, as an able-bodied person, you don't think would be a challenge, but are. And we are so behind on it, in my opinion. I know you can't rebuild every building. I'm not suggesting that, but there are some really basic things like lift buttons and there, you know, all sorts of basics. Even when it comes to like hand sanitizers, why the fuck are they up in the air? Why are lift buttons so high up? Just all the sorts of things day to day that we noticed, and also that staff in general, and it's not their fault, but that often aren't trained or made aware of things like that.
No, the staff one's a big one, and how people perceive it and you and what you're capable of. And we don't want to go around screaming and shouting that we can do all this and listen to us, but a little bit more education wouldn't harm anyone, I don't think. And yeah, bugbearers, yeah, steps is like my arch nemesis. So let's not get into them.
No. Well, look, we're not going to stick to keep you going for too much longer. I just would, I guess, do you want to sum up really what you're up to now, where people can find you, what you've got going on in the next few months? Anything else you'd like to say? We'll obviously try and link back to all of your socials and any of the articles. I think you're actually going to write a piece for us on racing, which would be great. But is there anywhere people can reach you, or if they want to discuss any of these things?
Yeah, Twitter would be Jacob Webb 22. You can find me there. Or Instagram is jacob.pritchard.webb. So if they want to contact me, go to those. Got a couple of sales. I'm actually off skiing. That's a good one. I'm actually off skiing for the very first time in Chamonix with a very good friend of mine. So I've booked lessons and I'm going sit skiing, mono skiing. Had a couple of indoor lessons. So that's
Wow.
yeah, I don't like to blow my trumpet too much, but the one thing I think I've done through this is not been afraid to put myself out there and try new things. And if I can help anyone in any walks of life, it would just be if there's an opportunity arises, if you can give it a go, give it a go and don't say no. That'd be my biggest thing. So I'm looking forward to that. Then I've got a couple of sales coming up in Ireland, England, and France. And I'm adapting the farmhouse as well and working away and busy trying to save money because this year's big plan is buying a tractor. So for the farm. So yeah, lots to keep me busy, doing a bit of writing and stuff and always trying to find new horses. So yeah, lots to keep me busy.
Great. Well, we look forward to hearing how the skiing goes. Definitely send us some pictures of that, and we'll get them up on the socials. But Jacob, thanks for taking the time. I will basically make sure that all the links to your socials are there. If anyone's listening and wants to give Jacob a follow, please do. And likewise, if you want to write in to us with any questions or anything like that, do so. And thanks again, Jacob, and we'll see you soon.
No, perfect. Cheers, Ollie. Thank you.